Count me in. You ready? 3, 2, Well, welcome to another Sankofa Conversations. Thank you for being very patient with us tonight. We had some technical difficulties, as you can tell by the sound a little bit, but I'm really excited to be able to host this conversation tonight. I have 3 very distinguished guests with me, but before we jump into our conversation, I really want to highlight our first episode, which was about grief, healing, and lament, with none other than great Reverend David Shisanya. So if you haven't watched that video, I really want you to go onto Sankofa's YouTube channel and watch episode 1. Episode 2 is going to be even better. I feel like this is some sort of like, do you know what I mean? Like series kind of thing, like. But tonight we're going to be talking about the topic of race, policing, and the church. And before we dive a little bit more into that, I'm going to open in prayer, and then I'm going to invite my guests to introduce themselves. So Father Lord, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for this opportunity that we get to discuss such a sensitive topic, God. And we pray that you will give us wisdom, and you'll give us understanding, Lord, as we navigate through some of these difficult and heartfelt things, Lord, that some of our audience and those that are listening in today have experienced. And so we pray for your grace, God, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. So I'm going to start from my left, going to my right. Just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. My name is B. Troy Powell, and I am the Chief Exec at the Ascension Trust, which is an umbrella body that set up initiatives like street pastors and school pastors. And we're all about trying to empower the church to reach out into its community and support people who are in need by caring, listening and helping, and building strong and healthy relationships.
That is one intro, bro. That is one intro. So Amaka.
Hi, my name is Amakai. I'm a police officer. I'm a detective inspector within the Metropolitan Police. Just really excited to be here. Really honour the work that you guys do and for hosting these conversations.
Absolutely.
Also really, really honoured to be here today. One of the things that I've been gleaning on your website, one of the things that the pillars that you guys stand for is around truth and truth telling. And I think that's so pivotal also to what we do as police officers, where we are called to be a witness to the truth. But we can have so much more conversation about it. But yes, very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Love it.
Hi, I'm Joe. I planned this wrong because I'm going after Emeka. I'm a police officer as well, and I'm a DI as well. I'm a detective inspector, but I'm not just copying. I'm one too. So, like Emeka, really excited to be here to have these kind of conversations, particularly around the pillar of truth, which is often so widely lost because it doesn't sell, it's not popular, it's not attractive. So these opportunities are really vital.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually gonna start with you, Joel.
That's kind of you.
And let us know what is your view on these 3 topics and where they intersect, because for some people watching, maybe seeing the title when it was introduced, what does race, what does policing, they on their own they don't seem like they connect, but where do you see the intersection between the 3?
So the intersection between the 3, race, policing, justice, the church, kind of 3 or 4. I think they kind of have this complicated dance and this complicated synergy, where in reality there should be no difference. And I suppose nowadays that would be called maybe more of an idyllic viewpoint. I think for the church, I'll start there because that's, I guess, where I started. I feel that the church should embody everything. It should be talking about everything. It should represent everything. It should represent policing. It better stand for justice. I would like to think, again, in a really utopian society, which I'm not really sure you can really say that around church, but race technically shouldn't be a factor, nor should it really be a factor in any of the things we're talking about, but it is, let's call a spade, and it shouldn't be more of a factor than we encompass and we welcome and we love all races, all peoples, and we want to spread the gospel and the good news of Jesus to everyone, because that's what Jesus was really about. That's what his life was about. But I also believe the church has a role in policing, not just in terms of being involved in local community police, but policing its own community. I believe there's a role in the church for, maybe not so much when I was a kid, where we just talk about backbenching and kicking people out because they didn't do the things that we think they did. But I think the church can spread a new light on policing, which is not just about discipline, although that's really important. But I think there's a function of policing, which is love. And a spin on the word or the term or the thought on policing, which is really about accountability and love and discipline, which are things that I think should be taught in the church, and the church should stand up on and champion.
I love that in terms of where you can. I love where you connected all three. That was quite almost like you practiced that.
Well,
Amakai, similar question for you. Where do you see these three playing out, especially in your role that you have as well?
Yeah, so I think the way that I see them play out is that our faith can sometimes, for some people, actually be intrinsically linked to your race or your ethnicity, and also therefore tied into your identity. And I think that is an intersection within itself, certainly for myself as well. But I was thinking about this certainly in terms of the church and Christianity, and I was thinking about a passage in Psalms where it talks about righteousness and justice being the throne, being the very foundation of God's character, of God's rulership, of who God is. And I was thinking about that in terms of what we as police officers are also called to do, right? To administer justice and to hopefully bring about right relationships within ourselves as colleagues, with the communities that we serve. So I think that there is that real great sort of intersection there. And as Christians, because God is righteous and God is just, we therefore can trust him, we can trust his character, and we can submit and consent to his rulership over our lives. And I see that sometimes in policing as well. We are called to administer the law justly, and when we can do that in the right way, and communities can trust us and people can trust us, they can therefore consent to being policed by us. And so that is an area of a bit of a challenge for us. I know that we'll probably get into conversation around that, but so for me as a church, I think that as we go about and saying that God, you rule because you are just, you are righteous, and therefore we submit to you, but we also submit to keeping your peace and extending your peace in the communities that we serve. And I was thinking about this because when we join, we swear an oath, right, to the Queen. I think you and I do, but there'll be a generation of be swearing an oath to the King, right? And we take that oath and we say that we will keep the Queen's peace or the King's peace. And likewise, as Christians, we submit to extending God's kingdom and keeping his peace and keeping his rulership. So I think they are so interlinked and so interlinked. And my prayer and my cry, and I know that the church community already do this, is that you keep on praying for us and that you keep on engaging with the police. And for those that do already, we thank you so much. I know that my church community, True Fine Church, definitely are always praying for the police and the communities, and we are so, so grateful for that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And you said a really interesting word, consent. And so, when we look at the history of race and policing, there's lots of instances where that consent maybe hasn't been treated with the respect. And so I want to kind of dive in to talk about that historical element for a moment, and what impact do you feel that the history has had upon the present relationship between the police and the community, and especially around this topic of consent. That word consent is a really important thing to highlight here. So I don't know who wants to go first, but
Well, I think Amakai was preaching. I don't want to stop the sermon. So.
Yeah, I mean, that is the bedrock, I think, of British policing, is that one of our top values is that we police by consent. And I think that it is probably fair to say, when we look at the history of the police and certain communities, particularly the black community, that there has been some turbulence in that journey. And I think actually one of the things that we are conscious of doing, I think, within the police now, is being able to teach and educate officers and police members of staff about that history. And I think it's really, really important. And, yes, there is a history, but I actually am really, really hopeful about the kind of things that are going on within the police now, just in the openness to have the conversation. The openness to actually talk about, our history with certain communities hasn't been great, and these are some of the things that have happened. Then we've got the Scarman report, we've got the McPherson report. These are some of the things, and this is a history, and it's really important that a generation of police officers actually know that history. But policing by consent is the bedrock of British policing. It is the bedrock of police legitimacy, and that speaks to not just the job that we do, but as you say, it's how we do our job, right? Are we treating people with respect and dignity? And when we do, they feel like they can absolutely consent. And when we don't, and we haven't always got it right, and people kind of not necessarily withdraw, but there is a perception there that actually, or a questioning, should I say, of that legitimacy in people's eyes. But
I think there's also I think Amakai mentioned about educating police officers, past and present, future, around the history of consent. I think part of the disconnect we have now as well is because of a lot of the history, some of it grossly terrible, some of it over-publicised and over-media exacerbated and stuff, but some really shocking stuff there. I think there's now been a disconnect and a warping of the term policing by consent, so that almost now, whilst yes, we do need to do a lot of education internally, I think there's some education which happens externally to the public, even with that term, we police by consent. I think a lot of people now, and the public now, take that phrase as a very literal thing. So like, if I come to stop and search you, well, if I don't agree with the search, then you can stop. And then that creates a lot of tension, because people are now thinking, well, actually, I need to give you permission. Actually, that's not what it means. Policing by consent is that actually there's a mutual respect between the public and the police, and we accept that as the public, you are here for our protection, and you need to do certain things which may deny our liberty to do such and such a thing. That's the consent bit. And that's the disconnect that we've got with the public, because actually there's no longer that respect, there's no longer that trust. It isn't now just about, actually, I give you permission to do something, therefore you can, and if I say no, then you can't, and you're acting on it. And I think that's another bit of education which causes a lot, particularly in the younger generations, where they may not fully understand some of the terminology, and because of the history, they're now being taught, well, actually, if you don't like what's doing, get your phone out and do this. Education piece, which hopefully in the future will help bring the two distant lands back together.
And Bijoy,
Yeah.
you come from a more community, I guess, facing perspective. So what's your kind of views on and perspective on this whole concept of consent, policing by consent, and how we educate ethnic minority communities, if we're honest,
Yeah.
around this topic?
No, absolutely. I think one of the key things is to recognise that church leaders have a role to play by being people of influence within a community that can build relationships with both the police and the local authorities and the congregation in which it serves, to be that voice of reason to say to the police, look, actually, our congregation may not know the information that they need. Would you be willing to come in and speak to them on a level that says, actually, this is what policing by consent means, to kind of diminish some of the misinformation and the messaging that's out there, to put forward a narrative that's easy to understand, easy to recognise, but also where you're saying, actually, we're trying to build a bridge at both ends to allow the police access to a community that they may not have access to, but also for the community to be able to share openly some of their concerns. So it goes from not just policing by consent, but informed policing of this is what's happening within a community and working on that. And I think we also need to recognise that we've got a shared vision. Amakai spoke about police trying to bring a peace to the city. One of the passages that I've been reflecting on this past year is Jeremiah 29, verse 7. Seek the peace of the city. Pray to God for its behalf, because when it thrives, you thrive. Now, in context, that passage is talking about a group of people who are taken out of exile. And so they're in a place where they don't feel like they can be themselves. But God is saying, pray for peace in the city. Because when it's peaceful, you will see that you've got a role to play and we will all flourish together. So our police are our peacemakers. The church is a place of peacemakers. It's a shared vision. Let's build the relationships where we're saying, actually, we want the same thing. But how does that look like in the different spheres? So we're building the frame of reference with which the whole community can engage with.
And it's interesting what you talked about in terms of church leaders, because Amakai, you have done a piece of research in New York and around how does the New York department come into partnership with volunteer faith groups. So I'd really love to hear a little bit more about your area of research, just to help, I guess, us understand more how we can apply some of this stuff in the UK.
Sure. I mean, some of that was actually based around, I don't know if you've heard of the Shomrim, but they are an Orthodox Jewish community patrol group. They do patrol around areas in particularly London and the East type area. And I became interested in this particular style of community policing a particular community without the police. That's where I started to become interested. I started to question, well, why? And there are lots of reasons why, but I started looking at looking at volunteers, given their own time, but as you say, believe in that shared vision and want to do something around keeping the peace, keeping communities safe. But there was still a question around, well, is there something that the police isn't doing that for? But so that was the interest, and I think what I was really looking at was, well, how does this relationship work? Then does it stay as it is in the sort of within the policing, at the outskirts of policing? Do we formally bring that in some way as parts of policing? Do they become accredited? And so that was the work, looking at how the relationship between the New York Police Department and the Shomrim work. And as it is, and I think that the balance is probably right, is that they work within the outskirts of policing, but we absolutely, and that's influenced some of the stuff that we do now, we absolutely still engage with that, with community patrol groups in terms of where it is possible and when it's appropriate, we share information. We make sure that in everything that we are trying to do within a community, that actually we are using and working together with patrol groups. And I think in the policing principles, Robert Peel wrote something that the public are the police and the police are the public. And I think that that is absolutely true. And I think that the work of policing and keeping the peace, yes, we have police officers that have taken an oath, but it is absolutely part of the community and definitely the faith-based community work that we do.
What were some of the key lessons for you that you observed from your piece of research? And I want to come to you because obviously, some of the stuff you talked about in terms of street pastors is massively relevant. But what were some of the key kind of takeaways? I know to surmise a piece of research is very difficult to be fair.
Do you know what? I think one of the main things, and I think that we are definitely getting there in the UK, is I think being a lot more open and less nervous around volunteer patrol groups. Now, there are reasons to have concerns. Obviously, we need to make sure that it is in the form of, for example, a vigilante group, and they are areas where one needs to be careful. But actually, on a whole, we probably need to be a lot more open. And I think that this was a couple of years ago, and I think that now in 2022, we're definitely a lot more open to that and seeing that happen. Yeah.
And for you, B-Joy, you lead an organisation, Ascension Trust, which is known, their kind of flagship program is street pastors. And we were talking before, you were saying it was 20 years to the April?
Yeah, so April 2023 will be 20 years since the very first patrol in Brixton, in Lambeth, where 18 street pastors went out on that very first night, 15 women and 3 men, which is why we always say if you want to get anything done within the church, ask the women, because the men would just be praying about it. But it's the reality of what started 20 years ago with those 18 people has grown to where we now have 250 initiatives all over the UK, 11 globally, but we have trained over 17,000 volunteers to go and be part of that work. And the heart behind it is, again, relationship, but being a visible, trusted and safe presence in the community where actually we can help support people who are vulnerable. Because one thing we've learned is, unfortunately, the police can't be everywhere all of the time. So where can we raise up people to be an extra pair of eyes and ears who, through working relationally with the police, are a trusted pair of eyes and ears to be that safe voice, but also frees up some of the resources to deal with things that we, as just people within the community, aren't equipped to. And the police are, because of their training, because of their commitment, because of their investment in that sphere. We need to be able to support them in that when resources aren't as high as they once were.
So it's about fostering the relationship between church, community, police, and realising that we all have a part to play.
Yeah, absolutely.
And keeping the peace.
100%. And one thing that relationship is so important is because the police have ears to the ground of where the significant needs are within the community. And if we as a church want to be able to respond to those needs, we need to know about them. So let's talk to the people who are in the know.
Joel, I want to come to you and say, you're a police officer, don't they pay you to just say the right things? All of this.
Let me stop you there. Nah.
So we're talking about this relationship and the importance of that relationship. Where do you see, we highlight something like what's happened this year, Chris Cabot, those instances and tragedies, they have a big impact upon the strength of the relationship between community and police. What would you say to somebody that is watching this, or as you said, Generation Z, Alpha, where they have a more interesting view on policing? What would you say to somebody like that?
I would literally, like I have, probably pause. And I don't think you can say any one thing. And I think that's the first thing to be really honest about. I don't think when we deal with incidents like Chris Cabba's or Mark Duggan's or George Floyd's or any of the hundreds of other incidents which go on which don't actually ever make the news, and destroy communities and really challenge families. I don't think you can try and say any one thing, and it's really difficult. I'll talk about my issues, I won't speak for my guy, but it's really difficult because you don't want to be defensive, because you don't want to build a barrier that says, but equally I don't want to come and play politics, and I don't want to tell people what they want to hear, so we can give you a nice, lovely message. I don't want to do that either. What I try and do, rather than saying anything, I prefer to ask questions, because I want to know what the person I'm speaking to wants to know. There's no point in me assuming I know what you want.
Yeah.
Actually, let me actively listen. What is it you need from me? What do you need? So if you've been affected by incident X, what do you actually need to know about this incident? And then if you tell me what it is you want to know about that incident, my next question will be, do you actually want to know it? Or do you need a platform to emote, or to grieve, or to express, or to vent? Because that's important too, and those things can be really cathartic. And we don't often give enough time in the dialogue for those things, because policing is a very personal thing. It's not just the job, it becomes how we view things, it becomes how we hear things, it becomes how we formulate our opinions, and how we make equations in our mind. So actually, when something terrible happens, the first thing we tend to go through, again I'll speak for myself, is the shame of that thing, in the same way you would if it was your family member or your close friend. You feel that because you're linked to that thing. But even then, that's not necessarily the first thing you want to come, oh no, we know how you feel, just because. And sometimes we do know how you feel, but that's not necessarily what the person wants to hear. That would be my thing, I think. What do you need?
What are the spaces that people can lament and grieve to in a constructive way? You mean, so that actually the lament is heard. The lament is about complaint, it is about telling the truth of your situation. What are the spaces and places that people can do that, and probably come to you after in a moment as well, B-Joy?
So generally speaking, you're only going to find those spaces if you already have the relationship. Often what we find in communities, churches, and this is not the absolute thing, there are exceptions everywhere, but what you find a lot of the times, even in the church spaces, that we only hear the community leaders at the time of the crisis. That's when you see people on the TV. Actually, if you've already got a relationship when the crisis happens, you've already got a space to lament. So there is some amazing work, and I always talk about some of the work I've been doing over the last year and a half-ish. There's some amazing work in Croydon. The relationship in Croydon between police and the community is the most phenomenal thing I've ever seen in life. They have space, and you'll talk to community leaders there, and they will say, well, you can talk about all the police officers there, but you can't talk about our police officers. Because they have that relationship, and that I've seen them vehemently defend in community meetings. Whatever's going on in the news is nice, but not ours. And I'm sure B-Joy will back me up there.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's phenomenal.
One of the big encouragements and testimonies I have about how that group, that community work is, in the past year, there has been 0 fatalities of youth violence, whereas last year we had one of the highest in the whole of London. But this 2022 has been an incredible encouragement and a reason to champion the work that goes on because of the relationships, because people feel that it's a safe space to share everything that's going on, but most importantly, to feel that they've been heard.
Absolutely.
Because it's through that empowerment of actually, I don't need you to do anything with this other than recognize that I have something that needs to be shared. So that person, that group, aren't just holding it all to themselves and asking the question, is anyone listening? Because I'm seeing nothing.
And one of the things you talked about, I mentioned earlier on, is about being a critical friend.
Yeah.
I love you to just kind of unpack that kind of concept around being a critical friend when it comes to policing and the community relationship.
Sure, there's a long-winded way of answering this, and there's a reason to this. We, as Christians, have this good news. But no good news is going to mean anything to anyone unless you've earned the right to share it. You've got to have people know that what you are is for them. What you want is the best for them. And so when you do share the good news, people know it's coming from a place of, I want what's best for you. It's the same with any form of relationship. You've got to have a relationship and a sense of actually, I'm sharing this because I want to hold you to account, because I love you, because I trust you and I want what's best for you. So that critical nature of the relationship has got to be built upon a friendship first, or at least an understanding of, I'm doing this because I want what's best for you and best for the people that you're serving.
So without that relationship, it can sometimes be a bit of an echo chamber to some extent. You can, but actually as you build a friendship, as you build a relationship. So I'm a local pastor in Lewisham, in a borough that it has a lot of serious youth violence, has a lot of problems. Just the other day, 2 boys in Abbey Wood were stabbed, 16 years old. I have people within the congregation that I pastor who live in those spaces, live in those places. What advice can church leaders give to people within their congregation when they see these big news kind of headlines? What advice do they give? Because I can't just to say pray. I think that's like the first step, but what more can church leaders and congregants do?
It's not the case of advice, but what Joel was sharing is space to lament, because actually people want that arena where actually they feel like I can't hold this.
Yeah.
Just so a space to share, a space to offload that pain, that hurt. Because with those 2 young guys who unfortunately were killed, let's also recognize that it's their family, it's their friends, it's their community that were impacted, but also following on with what's happened in the past week, they've arrested 2 other boys in relation to those crimes. That's 4 families who have been impacted, 4 families who have been traumatized because of what has happened, and then the surrounding community. So it ripples out. And if the pain isn't allowed to be shared, and people are being told this is what you must do, actually no one's been allowed to grieve. And unfortunately over the past 3 years, we've seen the impact of where people haven't been able to grieve because of everything that's happened with the pandemic, that actually the mental health concerns and the well-being issues that we're now starting to see, it's just like, if there isn't that space, then things escalate to a point where actually the support that could have been provided is now not available because of the waiting list on NHS, etc. Yeah. It has this ripple effect of, okay, where are we allowing these consequences to grow to the point where we can't handle it? But actually, if we can create space to have that opportunity to really listen to what's going on, for people's frame of reference to expand and grow outside of what they thought they knew into arenas just like, I've never seen it from this person's perspective. It's this case of actually, where are we holding all of that as a community with the responsibility of saying, we don't need to fix this, but we do need to hear it.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
Actually, I think Bijoy is absolutely right, and I think the step back from there, I don't know so much about congregates, but I know for church spaces, I'll grab one of those. Thanks.
Yeah, so I don't know so much about just congregates, but in church bases, I think what kind of comes to mind is seek out allies in times of peace, not war.
Yeah.
I think for churches, community groups, yes, it's incumbent on the police to seek out good relationships and those kind of things, yes. But actually, I think there's the police are the people and the people are the police. I think that's never a truer word has been said. And I think that communities have responsibility, might be a little bit harsh, but would be well advised to seek out allyships with their local police groups, communities, neighbourhood police, borough commanders, whatever it is, in times of peace, because when the war comes, when the incident happens, the police are so into defensive mode, they're getting it from the media and the community and the papers, and the Home Secretary's breathing down everybody's necks. They don't have the headspace to know that we are actually have the same message of peace.
Yeah.
And then when communities, the church leaders, families are now going to the police, the message that actually we all want peace is corrupted into, I'm now hurting and venting at you.
Yeah.
Whereas actually as a police officer, I will feel a lot more confident to hear people lamenting if I know actually we walked together before.
Yeah.
I can now understand that your lament is not me personally, but your lament is that we are all suffering and we all want the same peace. And how do we get it? Let's cry together. Let's break bread together. Let's do things together so that in the times when it really hits, actually we can cry together, not just I'm sitting here being attacked by you because you're now blaming me because you've got nowhere else to talk.
So there's a humanizing
Absolutely.
that needs to happen in it. Amakai, you seem like about to say something.
Yeah, I want to come in on that actually, and I actually want to come in, if you don't mind, just to read something out to you that was written by a police member of staff. So when you talk about where is the space, I think that I'm optimistic and hopeful about some of the things that happen within the police, because I think that we are creating spaces to have conversations, to listen and to speak and to provide police members of staff and police officers that are actually to share their experiences. And let's not forget that the police officers and police staff are also can be impacted by some of the things that we are speaking about. And one such member of police staff did actually experience that, and she wrote about it in the blog to the rest of the policing community. And when I read it, actually, I was moved to tears. And when I knew that I was going to do this, I was absolutely like, I want to get permission from this person to be able to read this. And if this person is, if they can actually make it to this talk, let them be here. But I'll read it. It says, our frontline colleagues need our support now more than ever. The traumatizing events that they witness and deal with is very often unspeakable. I pray that the officers involved that night find comfort and peace that James survived. I pray that all officers and staff who deal with a sequence of events regarding a stabbing or any traumatic incident, from the call handler taking the call to the first responders attending the scene, often chaotic, the scene of crime officers dealing with the aftermath of the scene, gathering key evidence, the custody staff and the investigating officers dealing with the suspects, the family liaison officers providing support to the victims and their families. There are so many teams I know now that are involved in incidences like this. I have truly seen the Met coming together in true form for the victim and, in my nephew's case, a survivor. My family and I waited in the family room, and I remember an officer saying to my family, "Whatever you need, let me know. You are part of the policing family." My sister and the rest of my family were stunned and wept at the kindness of the officer. And as the days passed, I learned that James was subjected to a horrific and unprovoked knife attack where multiple knives were used, and James was just riding his mother's bike on a residential road and was set upon by a group of people who stabbed him 5 times. The HEMS team often keep in contact with James, and they informed me, due to his injuries that James sustained, that they were going to amputate his left arm and his right leg at the scene. James has suffered severe life-changing injuries, and I never fully understood what life-changing injuries meant. Now my family knows too well what this means. That evening of the incident, our lives stood still for our family. We were broken, and that incident has changed our lives. We will never be the same. Often, wider society do not realize the ripple effects that knife crime violence has on a community, and life continues for many after they hear or read about yet another stabbing. And this, I'm not going to read all of it, but then she goes on to say that she is on a mission to reach out to faith groups as they are needed now more than ever to come together to bring about spiritual change in our community. And that is a serving member of the policing family being very vulnerable about what her and her family have gone through. And you talk about, that is a space, and you talk about what else to do. And from that, she started an initiative called Sit Up to Stand Up Against Knife Crime. The sit up is because her nephew James, whilst he was in his recovery stage, was able to do 100 sit-ups, and that is a milestone for him. And so the campaign is now called Sit Up to Stand Up Against Knife Crime, and they've challenged the police, the local ambulance, the NHS to be able to take the challenge as well. And I've invited her here today to be part of the audience. But I think what I really wanted to bring out in this, and you talk about the humanizing part of it, is that, oftentimes members of the police family can actually also be can be caught up in this, their families, and it's just as hard for the police as it is for the community. And we also need that space to be able to grieve. And I am actually grateful. I'm not getting paid to speak about how well the police is doing. We're not doing so well, but in other areas that we are doing so well. I cannot imagine a police of how many years ago that people, the police officers and staff can actually share those really deep experiences like that. So I wanted to share that as we talk about lament. And it's a small space. It's a blog on the intranet, but it's a place for lament, for grief. I certainly was grieving when I read it, and certainly reached out to her. So yeah,
it's something that we forget, isn't it? That when police officers put on a uniform, that there's a human heart behind it. And often it's only until you have family members who are police officers that you begin to understand it from a different perspective and realize that they're not robots, they're not, aliens sent from some other planet. They're actually human beings that in amongst all of these traumatic and difficult experiences that the community are experiencing, they are a part of that community and experience it themselves. I guess a question I want to ask is around you talked about having a safe space for, and this is taking a bit of a turn in our conversation, but a safe space for the police and those that are police officers to talk about what they are experiencing, because to some extent, they are at the forefront of experiencing human depravity, and that can harden your heart, or that can make you cynical, or if there aren't spaces. And it sounds like the church and faith leaders, it sounds like there's a cry for faith leaders to step up and say, actually, we can be that safe space for you. We're going to be the one space and community that is not going to shoot you down like everywhere else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If I come in, I know with our street pastors and part of the training, the nature of a relationship is if we see our police out while we're on patrol, is to go up to them, to ask them how they're doing. Actually, and due to the nature of the regularity with which we go out, we start to build up that background as to who these police are. And so we ask them, like, how's it going? What can we be praying for? And also we've got a team back at base of prayer pastors who are praying for everything, so we can relay those names, those people, those police, those situations back to them. And so I want to be an encouragement. I know our teams do this, but for police officers in general to know that if you have street pastors, know that they're a safe pair of ears designed to listen. And so if you want to share something that's really heavy, like, track them down, like, and ask them, actually, can you pray into this? Whether you're spiritual or not, it's just, again, that space of offloading. And that's what our street pastors are trained to do.
Yeah. For you guys, Jimmy, being in the police, having that experience, could you give examples where maybe church leaders, faith leaders, they've really come through for you? And if not, that's a challenge.
I think growing up in church and being part of a church community has definitely always helped me in knowing that that I have a community of people that are praying and supporting. I think that has really helped me, actually, because they've been some really difficult days. The things that you see, the things that you have to go through, there have been some evenings when I've gotten back from work and I've just thought, wow. And, you know, you started off asking about the intersection of faith and policing, and I think that is a prime example where there are times when I've just thought, God, I don't know how I would be able to do this job without my faith, without you, because I know that I can pray. I know that I can bring hope. I know that there is hope, and I don't know how I would be able to actually do that without my faith.
So I'm going to be 100% with you. I think, I shall speak for myself, other opinions are available. I think it's very difficult for church leaders and communities to help police officers to talk through this stuff because it's worlds apart. We don't speak the same language. We don't think the same way. That doesn't mean they can't help. So I know, like Amakai says, that my faith and my church community have helped me over the last 2 and a bit decades. But they help me not to talk about what I experience at work. They help me to form faith and character. That sustains me at work. There's a difference there. It's not like you can come home and talk about who annoyed you in the office. Yeah. You can't come home and talk about sensitive intel. You can't come home and talk about the sudden death that you dealt with, because, you know, you can't necessarily talk about. And I don't know about you, but I'm very conscious as well that some of the... So if I deal with a traumatic thing at work, I'm aware of the trauma for the victim, I'm aware of the trauma for the victim's family, I'm aware of the trauma that I feel, and then I'm also aware of the trauma that my colleagues feel. I don't then bring that trauma home to my family as well, who don't have the same hardened experiences as I do to then be able to deal with that. Likewise, when something happens on the TV, and for example, my family may take a view on what's being said, which is very widespread view on social media or whatever, and everyone feels the same way, and I'm sitting there going, but that's just not it. And if I'm not careful, that then becomes a tension in my home, because I have a very different view. I've got one toe in both camps. And so I think probably police officers and staff are very good at verbally or non-verbally letting people know that we're different and we think differently, and so it becomes difficult for yourself as a church leader to then infiltrate my defences around that. What I would say is there are opportunities. So, you know, seeking out becoming chaplaincies, you know, becoming police chaplain. I don't know what the rules are for it, but actually there are inquiries that can be made. There are spaces that you can get into where you can come and see the police family in their home, on their home court, where actually they can come and grab you for 5 minutes, and they feel slightly less disarmed rather than taking them out of that place, which is home, and then talk about home. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I think those are some of the challenges. But I think definitely church and faith and leaders and community help with character and faith, not necessarily content.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go on. Oh.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh.
No, I
need to come
think
to
you're
your
right. I think you do. You do. Well, I was just going to make a point. I think you are right. But they have been. Certainly, I remember one time where I have gone to my senior pastor and said, "This is happening. I need prayer," you know, and where I don't think I've ever done that, and I don't think I necessarily would have done. But I think maybe with that particular situation, and actually just. I think we talk about relationships and just knowing that actually this you can, and this is an absolute safe space to be able to do that. But it's not every time and it's not every situation. But I didn't discuss that with anybody else, you know, in the world, not even my family. But to be able to say, you know what, this is going on. Can you just pray? And that was it, really.
Yeah, I think it is an interesting observation around, as you said, Joe, like it's two different worlds. You know what I mean? I'm talking about sermons, offerings, and and Christmas trees.
You got a building fund going on.
Yeah, and all that stuff. And you know what I mean? But it still seems that actually, no, there is, even though there are so many differences, there are areas that actually church leaders and churches, they can be of an assistance and be a safe space where police officers are not seen primarily as police officers, but they're seen as human beings first. My only issue is there has been times where, in my upbringing, where police have not seen me as a human being, but they've seen me as whatever description. And I've been treated in accordance with that description. So I want to come to you, B. Joy, because I know the work around Ascensions Trust and building that relationship with churches and coming in at those critical moments. For example, your involvement in the Chris Cabba incident. One, what would you say to somebody like me who's had that experience? But two, if you could describe and talk about how Ascension Trust was involved and how it assisted and I guess was bringing a bit of, to use a Christian term, balm in Gilead to such a very painful situation.
Yeah, and I think the challenge is we've got to treat each individual as an individual. Because whilst there's commonality maybe in terms of the pain that's been felt, actually everybody has a right for them to voice that. And we need to create that arena where people feel like, actually, what was that pain? What was it that made you feel like actually you've been dehumanized? Because we need to break down the things that have caused those barriers and caused those emotions and caused that tension to recognize actually what needs to be rebuilt for somebody's frame of reference to be looked at differently, but also for there to be room for grace. And that's tough. It's not an easy thing to do, and it takes time. And so I recognize that when people have been hurt and that hasn't been dealt with, and then they're in a position of leadership or a position within the community where now everyone else is coming to them, such as a pastor, but actually their incident with the police hasn't been dealt with, they can't then bring that relationship or that connection, that bond that they feel they've been called to effectively enough. And so it's about actually let's treat each separate incident as the individual to recognize actually what is it that has created a barrier that needs to be broken down and then reframed and rebuilt for there to be actually that forgiveness, that repentance, that accountability, but also that justice that says actually this is what's supposed to happen. And for there to be a change from this society where I believe everything is always somebody else's fault to a point of, I'm really sorry this has happened. How can we rebuild it and bring healing into that? I think that's the first phase. And in how we were able to provide a response in light of the Chris Cabba shooting, we were able so Essential Trust has been working with the Racial Justice Advocacy Forum in this, because we recognise our role is all about actually who are the critical people that have the relationships with the police, with the church community, and with the community where this incident happened, to say actually what are the things that need to be mobilised. Most importantly, there need to be that space where actually people could be felt, people could be heard, but people could be supported pastorally, people could be prayed with and for. There are so many young people who were out after Chris Cabba because it's just like, actually, I knew Chris, I grew up in this area, this is my home, why is this happening? There were questions that needed to be answered. And so the church needed to be mobilised to provide some of those answers. And unfortunately, our street pastors weren't able to respond in the way that we normally would. But I know New Park Road Baptist, which is on the doorstep of where it happened, were able to respond, and they were able to open up. So it's about mobilising the churches to open up their spaces, so that effective signposts where community leaders can say, if you want to talk, if you need support, or if you need this, can be signposted to the right area for that space to be safe, for those discussions to happen. And the second thing was actually, how do we then mobilise church leaders who have that relationship to help with the communication flow? Because one of the challenges around the incident was actually the flow of information, because of the involvement with the IOPC, which was right, meant actually there was blockages in what communication then came out to the families, to the community, for people to recognise and to ask the questions, actually, what is going on? And so it's about actually, how do we then help that communication flow as a trusted voice? I was having a conversation earlier today where I used the word neutrality. And in my head, it's because actually it's a case of having a voice that shares information that is removed. But actually that's not right, because the nature of a relationship means actually you have those emotions, and it's not right to dismiss those. But it's not from a point of neutrality, but from a point of understanding the tension that's at both ends and bringing it to a place where actually what's shared doesn't become inflammatory unnecessarily.
I love that word neutrality, and I love because there are so much, as I said, news headlines and things that come out that it really inflames the situation, and most situations actually, which makes it very difficult to do the exact work that you're talking about, which is leading towards a place of healing. I've got a few questions from those that are watching. And one of the questions is, what can someone do if all their experience with the police have been negative?
So that's a really tough question, because again, I go back to my earlier thing. What would you like to do? What would you, and I say that slightly tongue in cheek, but actually also really, really quite seriously, what would someone like to do? Because there's this thing in society now that if you put the word police anywhere in the sentence, it seems to have its own set of rules. Whereas if you were at work and you had a bad thing with a boss, you would have to work through that problem. If you're at home, and you have a bad relationship or a negative relationship with a family member, to all intents and purposes, you have to work through that thing. And a lot of that work is, yes, the other person has to do something and there has to be healing. But the process of counselling or healing, I'm not saying that's what's required, but the process of that journey often requires me to look at myself and decide prayerfully, how do I ask, if you're a Christian, how do you ask God, how do you ask the Holy Spirit to help me to apply grace when I know I'm right and I'm being wronged, but how do I apply grace and how do I grow? Something inside me, I think it was said before that we've got this thing now, we've got this blame culture. So if I'm being wronged, it's the other person's fault. The other person is now responsible for fixing that thing. Well, actually, yes, the other person has a responsibility, but I also have a responsibility to command, as a Christian or otherwise, I have to command my environment, spiritually or otherwise, because I have the authority to do so as a Christian. I'm assuming our audience is Christian. If you're not, we'll come to that. But actually, I also have a response, and I'm not saying my responsibility removes or releases anyone else from their responsibility. I'm saying that I have a responsibility to influence my environment, and if I have continual negative experiences with the police or otherwise, then I suppose my first human nature is to avoid that dealing or confrontation. But where I can't, I have to decide how I'm going to conduct myself so that I am absolutely sure that I've done everything I can to do. And that is not a statement of blame on the person who's the victim of negative behavior. That is a statement of principle and character building for a person who says, I mean, if we go back to what Bijoy was saying around, and your question around how do we influence? I don't envy Christian or community leaders in times of community tragedy, because actually, yes, you need to give people a safe space, but actually you are also mandated to teach grace, which means that where I am in trauma, I still have to forgive. That's horrible. I'd almost rather sit on our side of the fence than yours, quite frankly. But there is a massive thing in society now which removes people's personal responsibility to do something about the trauma that they have not inflicted. Which is horrible because, if I say that, it makes it sound like, well, I'm back in the feds, and actually you've got to sort out your life and what are you doing wrong. No. You might be doing nothing wrong, but you still have responsibility to yourself, and I have responsibility to myself to conduct myself appropriately and as is fitting of a Christian or as just a good citizen. It's not the same as being a doormat, but actually, so you can be robust, but you can also be polite. Yeah. It's horrible. That's a horrible question. I don't like that. Whoever that was, don't ask me that question.
It is a hard question, and I think I would. I don't know the incidences. There's the thing. And when you said about your experience as well, I almost went all policey in my head because I was like, well, what was it?
Right.
What was it? Because then I can't answer.
Why weren't you behaving?
No, it wasn't that. It was not that. But I don't know what it is. But actually, Joe, I would flip that bit of responsibility around and say, for me, anyways, the way I look at it and in terms of the type of internal conversations that I want to have, and I say internal, is that actually we are held to a higher standard, and we do sign up to something that is higher, and whilst I think it's a very hard time for the policing family right now. I think we are grieving. We are grieving. But I think within that, I would say that actually, yes, there is the responsibility on that person, but I think we also have a responsibility as well to uphold and to do our job in a way that gives people dignity, so they walk away from that incident. They might have done something wrong. They know that they've done something wrong, but they still walk away with dignity, right? Mm-hmm. Knowing that this is wrong, but actually, you know what, I go with my dignity intact. So I do think that I don't know what that is, whatever that situation. I think that sometimes we also need to be quick enough to be able to say, you know what, maybe we did get it wrong and we're sorry.
Absolutely.
But likewise, you know, those interactions are two-way as well. And also, just finally, I know we're talking about this in the Christian context, but we're asking a lot of non-Christians. You know, we can understand a lot of these things. We can understand grace. We can understand a lot of these things. And I think that a lot of policing, we talk about it. We've talked about good news a lot today. We've talked about peace a lot. And I think that they are so intrinsic within Christianity and Christian values. And I absolutely promote every Christian to join the police. So go on a ride along is what I was also going to say. Like, go on a ride along. Like, actually try and find out what it is like. Just open your eyes. Try and engage. I hope that today you've watched and you've seen that we're fairly normal-ish people. Joy thinks so, right?
Apart from Joel. just apart from
Funnily enough, I actually run the ride-along scheme, so I'm actually responsible for it. So if you want to go, hit me up.
I've actually been on a ride along, and I think, and I have family members that are police officers as well. So I think, again, having that that very close and intimate relationship, and hearing stories, and hearing people's journey and my family members' journey, you think, oh, okay, yeah. And I think it was only until one of my family members became a police officer, which probably for you guys who are coming from a black community and a black family is like, you've become Judas to some extent, do you know what I mean? But I realized, no, they're human beings, and the things that they have to come up against and the things that they have to see on a day-to-day basis, it's not easy. One of the questions I've got is, if the church, and this is for you, B. Joy, if the church doesn't have a space, and I know it's talking a bit generally, to lament, to grieve, practically what can they do?
Surround yourself with key people who will give you that space. Because the church is the people, more than it would ever be the buildings. Find a community that are willing to invest in you, to hold you to account, but also to give you that space to be heard. People who will be for you, people who will help you grow, but people who will journey with you to eternity. Mm-hmm. It's about finding that openness of people who's just like, actually, you know what, I know you've gone through something tough. Who have you spoken to about it? That phone call to check in. Like, actually, let's not hide. If we need to talk to people, you know your people, you know the people who you can call at 2:00 in the morning, say, I really need to chat. Surround yourself with those key people who'll give you that space if you can't find it yourself.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I have a question here, this is probably the hardest question that I'm about to throw out tonight.
I'm sure Amakai can do it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. It's phrased this way: being a good Christian may sometimes mean being a bad citizen. How do you resolve the tension between being a Christian and following unjust laws? I did say, because the nature of our gospel is subversive to some extent. And when you look at maybe the communal context of the early church, they lived in peace, but then persecution was thrown upon them, and often it felt like the way that they lived was subversive to the way that Rome decided and wanted them to. I'm adding my little bit onto this question, but it is this thing of just because something is law doesn't mean it's right. Okay. And how do we as Christians in this day and age live in a way that is in accordance with the gospel, but that may clash with the law, may clash with the ways that communities are policed? How do you resolve that tension?
I was hoping that Joy was going to pick up his mic, but it seems as they've
I'm
planted.
thinking. I'll come off the back.
All right, cool. So I think, if I'm honest, that's not a policing question. I think that's a Christian question. And I think the only answer to that is with grace. I think that's the only way to do it. If you're going to disagree with something, you have to do it gracefully. I think, like, the backbenching days are going. I think there's definitely a space for firm belief and firm Christianity and upholding Christian principle. I think there's definitely a space for that, and that is right. But I also think that it's easy to conflate my sense of morality and Christianity and make it selfish and judgmental. I don't think we should be swayed with every wind of doctrine, definitely not. But I do believe that there is a space for conversation which is gracious and patient.
I want to start off by saying that I don't proclaim to have a monopoly on theology. But what I do want to say is my own experience indicates when a decision that I need to make is a decision for kingdom, my spirit, my gut, feels that peace that Jeremiah was speaking about. Because we have this concept of shalom, which is more than just peace, but it's this wholeness, it's this oneness with God, as it was intended to be from the very beginning. So our actions, our duties, our responsibilities, our laws, and our morality needs to bring us back to that place where we're at oneness with God and what he intended at the very beginning. And so how we engage or approach the law, if it doesn't lead us back to that oneness with God, I think we need to be able to give ourselves freedom and license to actually rethink our theology. There's an American work psychologist called Adam Grant who says the ability to rethink is the most powerful thing that we could ever have, because we need to be in a business of getting things right as opposed to being right. Yeah. Because that subtle nuance is the freedom to learn from things that you may not have gotten right before, as opposed to always wanting to be right, where there is no room to learn, no room to evolve, no room to engage. And to be able to hold up our hands and say, actually, do you know what? I got this wrong this time. What is it that I need to learn to be better next time? And allowing us to recognize that actually our frame of reference in how we approach and engage some of the laws or some of the rules that society has in place may be viewed differently by someone else. So allow ourselves to have different voices who are looking at the same thing from a different angle, see how our frame can be enlarged. So actually we're not just creating that echo chamber of the same voices empowering what we may have, but actually different voices to grow what we have.
I think absolutely, as Bijoy and Joel have mentioned, I think that I'm thinking about actually something like this, like Sankofa, where and other forums and other different groups that actually, whether it's social justice, whether it is, I think, a point of law where people actually feel like this needs changing, this isn't right. I think that they are ways to engage in trying to change the law or to, try and get more understanding. And I think that's something that what you guys do here is absolutely amazing and really, really good for that, for expanding, as B-Joy talks about, one's knowledge base, one's sort of sense of community, engaging with others, asking questions, learning. But actually, I think that being engaged with something like this, that actually is, I think, standing for social justice, but looking at it in form of truth-telling, in form of lamenting. And there are so many other organizations, I think, that perhaps one can look into in a practical level to try and maybe get a little bit more understanding, or actually do something about some of those things. Yeah. That's what I will say. And I think just finally linking into something that B-Joy said, and something that I heard over this weekend at church, is that, does it advance kingdom? Whatever it is that it is, or whatever decision that you make, what you're thinking about, is it advancing the kingdom of God?
Yeah. I think, a lot of the angst and emotional pain that drives this conversation around race, policing and church is often individual experiences, real life, on both, I don't want to create sides, but on both sides, whether it be people within the community or police officers. One of the things that I'm involved in the borough that our church is chairing the engagement, the police engagement and community forum. And one of the things I've spoken about is, how does the police actually educate the community around its rights when it comes to things like stop and search? So you talked about there is a misunderstanding of what police by consent means, and it isn't like I can stop you, here's a consent form, and you can either say yes or no. But sometimes that transparency, that openness, you say, I nearly got policey, and using police jargon, and sometimes those things are barriers to understanding in plain English what is it that you can do and what you can't do when you are in an interaction with a police officer, or what are the pathways that you can take to lament, to grieve, to talk about truth and what has happened either to you or in your local community. But I think one of the key things that for me tonight I'm taking away is that we have to always look at things through a gospel lens. And I think the unique nature of the gospel is that it wants to see transformation in all, whether you are victim or perpetrator. That's the devastating nature of sin, one could say, is that it infects and impacts all. And the heart of the gospel is to say we do want peace, we do want shalom. That's what Jesus came to bring. But there has to sometimes be a reality of maybe it's blessed are the peacemakers, not keepers, makers. And sometimes you have to break some stuff to make peace. And I think that may be where that question kind of comes from, is that sense of sometimes it has been caricatured that as Christians we are always good, nice citizens, but actually the cry of law and order can be an oppressive one sometimes when we look through history.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus wasn't a doormat. The man went and broke down the temple. You know what I mean? The man got vexed and stood up for what he, in modern day terms, he stood up for what he believed in, and that's absolutely right. But then he also did a lot of stuff. The same man who overturned the tables and cast out the thieves and robbers and all that kind of stuff, also allowed himself to get whipped and put on a crucifix. You can't take some of it and not the rest of it. And this is where we go back to, and I always, I'm a massive advocate for personal responsibility. on whichever side of the table you sit, whether you're in the policing community, whether you're in the community, church community, well, doesn't matter. I'm a massive advocate of person. So actually, and that's what happens, like you say, it becomes a personal experience. And even the deceptive nature of sin, I might not be out robbing people and stuff, but actually, even if I allow myself to feel vindicated by my trauma so that I can warp the reality of what's going on. So actually, even let's take that question. I'm moving it away from the question asker, but even if I take that question, so I'm now thinking, right, actually, to be a good Christian and stand up for social justice, I need to be a bad citizen. Yeah, there might be a time where that happens, but as long as you get that check and balance, and as BJ says, actually, you're making sure that what you're doing is in line with what the Holy Spirit is guiding you, and you have peace with what you're doing, that actually you don't just become the justice warrior and not the person on a cross. Because actually, Jesus did both. Yeah. Don't come and tell me, actually, I'm doing this for Jesus, but when someone says be humble or something, you can't manage that. Yeah. Personal responsibility is massive.
No, absolutely. You can't separate grace away from justice. The two come hand in hand. You've got to apply both to be able to break the systems that need to be broken, but grace then have the humility to rebuild something and for it to not be perfect straight away. Yeah. Because it takes the time. It will be a struggle, and you need to recognize that. You can't just walk away once the system's broken. You then have to be part of the rebuild. Yeah.
And build on truth, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So how do we keep, we talked about accountability earlier on, and often sometimes when it comes to the accountability on the police side, big words, clever phrases are used when ultimately sometimes people just want to hear, we got that wrong, and we are working hard on getting it right. Question, why doesn't it happen often? Why does something always come out as a scandal or as a this or as a that? What does that have an impact upon the building of relationships and trust?
I can tell you're itching to answer.
It's not my goal to make my guests quiet tonight, but
it doesn't happen, and this is a terrible, terrible answer. It doesn't happen because people are people. And there is no one central route for answering the mistakes, for every mistake that's made. So, for example, if you have an issue in Lewisham, then someone from Lewisham is going to answer. If you have something in Croydon, someone from Croydon is going to answer. And then you are dependent on whoever is controlling that message as to how that response will be given. So if you come to me and I make a mistake, I'm going to say, oh man, I messed up. I'm really sorry. How can we do this? You're going to come to someone else and they might say, well, actually, if you're coming to the police, you need to make sure you're doing these things and those things and these. And they might evade because, you're looking at the skill of the orator. You're looking at the preparation of the person who's given. That's a terrible answer because it doesn't actually answer the question other than to say, well, how long's a piece of string? But actually sometimes. Go on, prove me wrong.
Yeah, I know. I don't know that I fully know the answer. Yeah. I know that in 2020, when George Floyd happened and there was a silence in the UK policing community, I know that I was contacting and emailing very senior officers saying, why the silence? Can you guys say something? Because actually, officers on the street who are policing the protests need to know either good or bad. They need to hear something from you. Yeah. What is our message? And I think that sometimes we want to make sure that we get the right message out. I think that sometimes we are considering so many factors, so many, I don't want to use the word groups, but they are so many things to consider. I think that the higher up you are in the organization, I think the more politically astute one has to be. and I'm not saying that is right necessarily, but I think that there are lots of considerations that they take into consideration. But you're absolutely right. I think that sometimes I talk about the humanness of policing, and sometimes it is just that, to just reach out and say, you know what, this is going on. This is not even right. We're not sure exactly what is going on, but yeah, we're looking into it and stuff. And sometimes, you know what, it's the sensitivity just on the practical level. You know, you talk about the independent office of, public inquiry and stuff. If there are sensitivities around the case, we may not be so forthright in necessarily making a statement or even issuing out an apology. But I have to be honest and say that I don't know the answer. I think that they are lots of different factors, but I think that sometimes that silence and that length of time that it takes to eventually hear something does impact, and sometimes in a negative way.
I think the issue with George Floyd, the silence was not just seen from police, it was also seen from church leaders as well, that we kind of thought, we're supposed to be the community of grace and justice, and there wasn't much coming out, in terms of what is the message from the church. I want to finish with this last question, because we can talk about the past, about the history of police and communities. We can have instances in the present about maybe reoccurring events that have happened in the past, but it's really important for us to look to the future and look to what is the type of world, what is the type of community and society that we want to build. And so I'm going to ask you individually, for you, from your perspective, what does the future look like, and how can the church play a key role in building a peaceful tomorrow? Any one of you can give us the blueprint to world peace.
So, over the past year, I've never been this guy before, but I'm a guy who now talks in acronyms. And the acronym I have is HOPE. Help open people's eyes. It's about allowing ourselves to ask the question, what are some of the challenges that we as society face, but also the challenges that people who we don't engage with regularly face? What are the vulnerabilities that we're not aware of? And where are eyes closed to what those vulnerabilities are? Because the more closed eyes we have, the less opportunity we have to provide the support that we might know is available. So it's about actually what are the needs in our community, whose eyes are open to them, and how we bring in that hope that says actually you don't need to suffer alone. Getting the police involved helps us understand where there are challenges are. One of the big things that our street pastors are currently involved with is supporting the police in the area of violence against women and girls, because it's such a big increasing vulnerability. But where are the blind spots in our society? And where are our eyes needing to be opened to where those blind spots are, so that we can be part of the response alongside the police, alongside the community and the services, to say, we're here to bring hope, but we need to know where needs hope to do so.
And this is, as Joel said earlier, not because I'm sitting next to Pedro that I'm stealing your points, but actually when I was thinking about today, when I was thinking about policing, the challenges that we face, where we're at right now, I was really thinking that I'm feeling hopeful. And I think for me that has been a theme for today. Why am I hopeful? I think that I'm hopeful because for some of the very, I think, open spaces that we're now having and creating within the police family to talk and to listen. I think that there are a lot of things that there are a lot of things that have hit us. When I say hit us in terms of reports and inquiries, that we are, I think, and it's really, really important that we are self-examining and we are looking at ourselves and we're looking at our culture and we are creating open spaces for people to be able to listen and to be able to talk as a family. And one of the things that I think that has kind of been my mission and my passion is to get us to have those conversations and to talk, because it's uncomfortable. There's a big, massive elephant in the room. It's not pleasant, but you know what I always say is, do you know what? Everybody else is talking about it. Everybody else out there is talking about us and is talking about these conversations that you and we don't want to have with each other. And there is no way for us to be able to, I think, effectively police our communities, understand our communities, if you and I can't even have a conversation about some of the things that are hurting us and are hurting people within the community. So I think that I am hopeful. It doesn't come without its challenges and its criticism. Not everybody likes it. Not everybody thinks that it's a core part of policing. I think it's an absolutely core part of the policing mission to be able to have these conversations. But I'm hopeful that there is the space and there are spaces within the police right now to be able to have those conversations, to be able to grieve, to be able to lament. So I think that is a good starting point.
I think the future for me would be an encouragement, not so much a challenge, but to go back to what I said before about finding friends in peacetime and carving out relationships. It's easier for churches to seek out policing groups and their local neighbour. It's easier for churches to do that than it is for the officers to come find you, because then they need equality and parity and to find every religious group and everything, and it just can't. It's ridiculous. Yes, we can say as a church, well, we're the only church in this area. Yeah, you might be, but actually you're not the only mosque and synagogue, and there are thousands, hundreds and thousands of languages, and if we start singling out people, then we upset these communities. So actually find friends in time of peace, because when those relationships are forged, and that might be tricky at first, but when those relationships are forged, when we get through that initial icky bit, actually it makes standing together with a similar message much easier in times of war.
Yeah, I really love the sense of, I guess, the sense of optimism, but with a hint of realism that it's not going to be easy going forward, and it's not going to just happen just like that, or it's not just going to happen in a prayer meeting either. I think it is going to be actually building those relationships, as you said, in times of peace, not just when everyone's got their guns out and pointing it at the police. It's easy to join the crowd, but actually being a part of a relationship and a space where people can talk honestly and transparently about what's happening in their community. And I think what was mentioned earlier about policing areas with an understanding of the cultural context, and having like a high level of cultural competency where you are policing and where you are as a church leader as well is vitally important. I really want to thank you guys for taking time out tonight to just come and have this conversation with us and to share your experiences, your expertise. I thank you so much for those online who have persisted. I've been watching some of the comments. Jackie, I'm so glad you didn't sign out, but you stayed with us. And what we will hopefully do is just speak as a team about how maybe we can get the first half of the conversation up for you guys to watch. But hopefully, I don't think this is going to be like a part one. I feel like we should do like a part two of this conversation. They're all smiling, but thinking, Jerome, don't give me no hard questions. But really, I want to thank everybody for watching. Thank you for giving us your questions and just being patient with us. But this is a really serious topic and sensitive topic that we are wanting to have a discussion about. And I think, as it said before, the mere fact that we have the openness to have it and the will to have it is really key to bringing about peace. So I want to thank you so much, guys, for joining us, for you guys online, and we shall see you in the new year. If we don't see you before the end of December, Merry Christmas, have a happy new year, and be ready and out on the look for episode 3 of Sankofa Conversations. Catch you later.